Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is October 12th and we have a packed episode with lots of news. In this episode, little green men have appeared on the border between Russia and Estonia. Russia remains silent. Orban has come up with a new mischief for Europe and is already collecting signatures. And against the backdrop of discussions about supplying Tomahawks to Ukraine, Putin suddenly and sharply wanted negotiations again. The Kremlin has accused Trump of attempting a coup d'état. Meanwhile, in Russia itself, payments to those going to war have started to be reduced without explanation. And what Assad is doing in Moscow, as well as how Russia has decided to threaten yet another country with war, all this and more in today's episode. There will be a lot of interesting things. So, if this is your first time on this channel, subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. Russia is ready for a peaceful settlement. Trump is also calling to sit down at the negotiating table. But the EU and Kyiv are unwilling to do anything in this direction, said Putin's press secretary Peskov. But as soon as the topic of transferring the possible transfer of Tomahawks came up, as soon as Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky had a phone call and discussed this topic, this statement was immediately made. Russia is once again ready for negotiations? Let me remind you, not long ago, Vice President Vance stated that it was Russia who refused the bilateral format of negotiations with Ukraine and the trilateral format with the participation of the US. And just recently, the Russian Foreign Ministry stated that the momentum for negotiations after Alaska has been exhausted. And Putin refused Trump even a temporary truce. Remember what Trump was asking for before Alaska? So, I don't know, in Russia, whether they coordinate their statements or not. Well, here is your proof of how much Russia wants peace. Green men were spotted on the border between Estonia and Russia. That is, the incident occurred on a section of the border near Sadze, where part of the road passes through Russia's Peskov region. So there's this so-called Sadze boot, as it's called. The road goes through Estonia, and then there's this indentation, Russian territory. And the road passes through this indentation for a short stretch of about 1 kilometer. The road passes right through it, and then it continues on through Estonia. So, patrols recorded significantly more active activity on the Russian side than usual. And the police managed to film the military, those very same green men. They were dressed in pretty much the same way. Let me remind you, a green man refers to Russian soldiers who removed their insignia. They simply annexed Crimea in camouflage uniforms. Back then they were called green men. Putin said, "It's not us," and then later admitted, "Well, yes, it was us. I fooled you all, as always." So, the Estonian police noted that the men's uniforms were different from those of the border guards. That's for sure, they were definitely different. They were in tactical camouflage, several dozen people. I looked at the photos. There were tactical vests, utility belts, balaclavas to cover their faces, caps. Basically, the kind of gear special forces wear when they're on a mission, and they were armed with real weapons. So these groups moved along the border, and at some point they came out onto the road and lined up across it. The Estonian border service requested some clarification from the Russian side, but the Russian side responded that these were all standard procedures. Goodbye. This is a relatively new type of provocation from the Russian Federation. Naturally, these groups came out onto the road with their faces covered so that they would be noticed, so that it would enter the information space. The logic is very simple. Little green men are already here, right on the border of the Baltic states. We all remember that these little green men showed up and annexed someone else's territory. This is how Russia is currently trying to intimidate at the borders of Estonia. Once again, I'm convinced of how right the decision was for some of Russia's neighbors, ideally all of them, of course, to mine the border with the Russian Federation. Ideally, they should also build a giant wall, like in zombie apocalypse movies, on that side so that no one can get through. Because over there, this Russian world will act just like that, to crawl toward the borders. They don't want to do anything in their own country. They want to do something in yours. You have it beautiful, cozy, and nice, and then the Russian world comes and, like a blight, infects the territories it enters. And after that, there is decay and oblivion. I actually really like Estonia. I've been there more than once. Tallinn, Olde Hansa, that Third Dragon Tavern with the annoying, there's that barrel with pickles and you need a stick with a nail to hook that damn pickle. You can't just grab it, but you really want to. Well, Tallinn is beautiful and the Museum of Occupations really impressed me. I really love Estonia. My ancestors are from there. By the way, big greetings to Estonians. If you're from Estonia, by the way, write in the comments what people are saying about this incident there. I'm always grateful for information directly from the scene. Well, from the green men and this new kind of provocation, let's move on to the brown man. Orban has started collecting signatures against the EU's military plans. He announced this on his Facebook page. Europe is moving towards war. A few weeks ago, the Brussels military plan was presented in Copenhagen. Europe pays, Ukrainians fight, and Russia will be exhausted. We didn't know how much it would cost or how long it would last. Instead of a strategy, the Brussels officials just chased after their dreams. I made it clear to Denmark that we are not asking for this. Since then, they have started a campaign against Hungary. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And he continues writing. The arsenal is enormous. Accusations of espionage, scandals. We cannot just stand by and watch this happen. We need to demonstrate once again that the Hungarian people do not want war. That is why today we are starting a petition against Brussels' military plans. We will be in every city, in every village, because right now we need all peace-loving Hungarians, wrote Orban. And the pterodactyl of peace, Orban, decided that he is the smartest one. He is doing this publicly with such pomp through social media and of course the media under his control, under the slogan, Hungarians do not want war. In reality, however, this is a subversive action against the policy of the European Union, which is aimed at supporting Ukraine and creating pan-European defense mechanisms. So he says, we don't want war, we don't want it. No, you are undermining the defense capability of the European Union and the North Atlantic Alliance. And let me remind you that recently Orban has become very nervous. He is now openly attacking joint EU initiatives. And you know what? This is how closely things are connected. As soon as Putin feels the heat, he immediately wants negotiations again. It's the same here. As soon as Putin feels the heat, Orban immediately starts acting actively. The worse things are for Putin, the more active Orban becomes. The Trojan manatee understands that if he is left without Russian oil and gas, his power simply won't last long. He has always relied on this before elections, saying he wouldn't raise rates, that while everywhere else in Europe rates are going up, he won't raise them. And next year, let me remind you, there will be elections in Hungary. For Orban, losing power would be a catastrophe. Investigations into all sorts of shady schemes would start right away, so now he's sticking to his old playbook. A tried and true pre-election scheme. It's a two-step move playing on two fronts. Creating an external enemy. He claims Brussels wants war, but he alone will shield Hungary with his own hands and prevent war. But no one... There will be war if Putin isn't stopped. And he paints the image of an external enemy. Brussels, supposedly bad officials, evil, want war, and only I can save you. Protecting the Hungarian world, and then there's economic populism, the second area, which is really his domain. He built his entire approval rating on the claim that as long as he's in power, you'll have cheap gas and electricity. But it's cheap because Hungary was buying, or rather soon we'll have to say was buying, Russian gas on special terms. But he also solves a couple of important tasks, and here my inner political strategist wakes up. That is, he launches internal propaganda. If you want peace, vote for Orban. He's set up these tents all over the country now. There, they'll be explaining things to everyone. Well, for those who have the internet, there's no need to explain. Mainly, they'll be targeting the older demographic. And it's not really about collecting signatures. He'll write his party's name on the tents, as if he's collecting signatures. This will be about direct contact with voters right before the elections. So it's kind of like an illegal election campaign. And of course, they'll be probing the mood, where to offer incentives, where loyalty is low, who's for the EU, who's against. For some reason, I'm even sure he'll use the same tactics that the pro-Russian party Georgian Dream used. In Georgia, or Russian Dream as it's also called, he'll show images of destroyed Ukrainian cities and say, if you don't want this to happen here, vote for Orban. How cynical was it to do that in Georgia, right? You yourselves went through all of this in 2008 when the Russian Federation invaded. Is your memory really that short? And I'm not addressing the Georgian people here, but rather the corrupt politicians who are doing everything they can to turn Georgia away from the European Union and toward the warm, bubbling swamp of the Russian Federation. By the way, Orban is actually facing serious problems. The Hungarian opposition is gaining ground quite rapidly. I think that if Orban loses, there will be another little house next to Assad's and Yanukovych's in the Moscow suburbs, but a more modest one. Friends, let me remind you that today we have an important fundraiser. It will last for one day. It's a one-day fundraiser, because I think we'll be able to close it in a single day. It's not very big. This one is for the warriors. It's for the 54th Separate Mechanized Brigade to repair vehicles for combat missions. They recorded a video message for us. Please take a look.
Ми бійці 54-ї окремої механізованої бригади імені Івана Мазепи. Звертаємось до глядачів каналу Бориса Тізенгаузена за допомогою закрити збір по ремонту автомобіля для виконання бойових завдань. Ваша підтримка для нас вкрай необхідна. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
And you know, once again, it's acquaintances who reach out, not our defenders themselves because they're too modest. They feel uncomfortable asking. It's acquaintances who reach out and say everything has been checked, it needs to be taken care of, and so on. I look at them. They're the real deal. This is Ukraine. Someone's brothers, someone's fathers, someone's sons. There are young ones like Kesha with the call sign, like Zhenya. Remember, 20-year-old guys? They've had several concussions but still return to duty. There are older ones too, for example, like the pastor from Kharkiv. He recently sent a chevron. Here it is. Pastor, if you're watching us, a big hello to you and your brothers in arms. I don't know, there are people like us, like Moses from the 252nd Battalion, like Uncle Sasha. There are so many people we've helped, like Stas from the 3rd Assault Brigade. We've done a lot of good things together. Let's help our warriors this time as well. The details are in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. I see everyone, and I want to say a huge thank you to all of you. A huge thank you from myself and from our warriors. And if you don't see it on some other channel, check the QR code. You can use it to go to the fundraising page. Russia has accused the US at the UN of attempting to change the government in Venezuela. They've eaten too many fly agarics there. Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzya, stated at a Security Council meeting that the United States is attempting to effect a change of power in Venezuela under the pretext of combating drug trafficking. It was a special meeting that was devoted to Washington's military activities off the coast, Venezuela. Well, Nebenzya claimed that the White House was acting in accordance with the classic instruments of color revolutions and hybrid wars, which have affected millions of people around the world. He accused the American side of deliberately closing the window of negotiations with Maduro and ignoring Maduro's calls for a joint fight against this illegal trafficking of prohibited substances. Listen, things are really heating up for Maduro now, aren't they? Right away, he started offering up gold mines and oil fields just to stay in power. Let me remind you, Maduro is a classic dictator. He wiped out the opposition, and this year the main opposition figure from Venezuela received the Nobel Prize. He wiped out the opposition, and the country is in some kind of, in such a backwater with hyperinflation. Millions of people have left, but he still clings to power, holds on under sanctions, but holds on. And now Nebenzya comes out in his defense saying, look how bad the United States is. Now they're trying to deprive the dictator of power. Let me just remind you, this is the same Nebenzya who talked about combat mosquitoes, that special drones with some kind of containers would fly into Russia, release combat mosquitoes, and they would start biting Russian soldiers and infecting them with terrible, terrible diseases. Should I go on? Or that there were so many Slavs, these mosquitoes would bite them. In short, this is that very Nebenzya. Get this Jabba the Hutt out of the Security Council. He's a representative of a country that's literally at war here in Ukraine right now, trying to seize foreign territories, bombing cities, and yet they're accusing the US of wanting to interfere in Venezuela's internal politics. By the way, remind me, why hasn't the UN been dissolved yet like the League of Nations was? The League of Nations was dissolved when it proved incapable of preventing war. So what's the problem with the UN? Or is it that there are tens of thousands of officials sitting in their cozy chairs and everyone is perfectly content with that? And how can a country that has trampled all over the UN be a permanent member with veto power? But that's a rhetorical question, I'm just saying. While some trying to save their own skin are causing trouble for the entire European Union, others are helping Ukraine. And not just a little. Britain delivered hundreds of air defense missiles 5 months ahead of schedule. This information appeared on the British government's website. We're talking about the light multipurpose LMM missiles, which have simply become, well, since 2022, they've been protecting our skies. And that's not all. The UK will launch another phase of support worth more than £1.5 billion to integrate these missiles into our air defense system. And that's still not all. The UK will provide Ukraine with a record package of £4.5 billion. Thank you, United Kingdom, for standing with us, and thank you to everyone who helps Ukraine. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. This helps, first of all, to promote the channel, and secondly, to spread the truth and fight against the bald evil. So make sure to subscribe. Speaking of bald evil in Russia, and how the 1.5-meter heel outsmarted everyone, 57 regions in Russia are already facing a gasoline shortage. That's according to the BBC's calculations. Every third oil refinery has been attacked. In August, there were 14 attacks, in September 8, and in the first 10 days of October, another 4, but I'll add 2 more, so that's 6. And in general, there was an article that the US is actively helping Ukraine plan these strikes. So why hasn't the Kremlin made a statement about this yet, huh? Did you notice that? Well, here you have a statement, if I'm not mistaken, it was Bloomberg or Reuters, that the United States is actively helping, planning, finding weak spots in various targets. So why is no one in the Kremlin making a statement about this? Or did they forget to pick up Medvedev from after-school care and he hasn't had time to write anything yet? Lately, Russians have been commenting rather cautiously on, let's say, tough initiatives from the United States. I don't know how things will go with the Tomahawk missiles, but this is something that really, really worries Russians. On their talk shows, they're already saying, we'll strike Paris. Solovyov was practically foaming at the mouth. We'll hit Paris. We'll hit Berlin. We'll hit everyone. His opponent says, so, do you want to start another war in Europe? Yeah, let's start one now. Aren't you already at war with NATO? Haven't you been for a long time? By the way, how many NATO soldiers have died in this war? Speaking of which, in Russia, they've started to reduce the one-time payments to contract soldiers who are going to fight in Ukraine. Not just reducing them, but quite significantly. For example, in Tatarstan, just think about it. The one-time payment used to be, if you convert it to dollars, about $33,000. They reduced it to $8,500. That's a significant cut. That's more than 3 times less. You see? In Chuvashia, the payment was $26,500. In the Republic of Mariel, it was $31,000. And they also reduced them to just over $8,000. What's going on? Previously, these payments were only increasing. The last increase was literally just a few months ago. And by the way, no one is explaining what caused such a significant reduction. But it turns out, after some thought, and I think there's probably a lot of truth to this, that now, even for big money, no one is willing to go. So, last year 166,000 people came to fight for money, but this year it's 127,000. In other words, the numbers are dropping significantly, really significantly. They've already emptied the prisons, gathered up all the so-called bio-waste, and sent them off. Now, even the bio-waste doesn't want to go die for that kind of money. So they decided, why bother then? Well, now they'll probably try some other methods. They've already introduced electronic draft notices and so on. We won't pay them anymore. Whoever has no other choice, and Putin has made sure that's about 90% of the population, those who need to will come even for 8,000. But this is a very telling sign that the treasury is running dry. By the way, there was some news recently that Assad was allegedly poisoned in Moscow. Not very successfully, he was discharged from the hospital. Turns out he's made himself quite comfortable there. An investigation was conducted, and it turns out he lives in Moscow City. He owns about 20 apartments there. And he occupies 3 large apartments, actually living there. And do you know what he spends almost all his free time doing? He spends it playing online video games. And according to a source, he also often stays at his villa outside Moscow. Let me remind you, a talkative Assad is Putin's worst nightmare. Because Assad knows so much that it would be enough for 3 Hague tribunals, although Putin already has enough for 3 Hagues as it is. So Assad has set himself up quite nicely, and back in 2019, the Financial Times reported that he bought 19 apartments in Moscow City, and now he's picked up another one, yes, added it to his collection. That was in 2019. Look how forward-thinking he is. By the way, let me remind you, Lukashenko is also building himself a little house somewhere in Sochi. Well, what can you do? That's just how it is. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Lukashenko, or I don't know, if Orban loses the elections, he'll rush over there too. They'll all be there. They'll have, some kind of sanatorium, a cheerful dictator retreat, and they'll be walking around in their pajamas, catching butterflies or something, reminiscing about the old days, about how they used to rule countries, and then the orderly will come in and give them all their pills. So I came across some news. The Russian Orthodox Church is, bottomless in every sense. It's a cesspool from which all sorts of devils crawl out. Archpriests, their leader, this patriarch Kirill, who calls the war sacred, they crawl out and periodically spout complete nonsense. So there's this prominent archpriest, Sergei Kulpinov, who recently gave some important advice to elderly Russians who are actively discouraging their own children from having kids. He tells them, if you truly cannot have children because of some significant financial problems, then you elderly Russians should absolutely sell your valuable property and then give it to your children who are indeed supposed to have kids, because you've already lived your entire life. You can go ahead and die a little now. An archpriest of the Russian Orthodox Church. Can you imagine? I don't even know what to say. This is classic Russian Orthodox Church, besides blessing weapons like those missiles they have. They even have processions against drones. Priests fly around in helicopters with icons saying prayers or something. A procession against drones. By the way, that Kremlin paper jackal never stops threatening other countries. This time his press secretary, that mustachioed floozy Peskov, came out again and made the following statement. One country has already made this mistake before. He was talking about Moldova. And I quote, "Nothing good awaits Moldova if it continues on a path of confrontation with Russia for the sake of building relations with Europe." This is how he commented on Moldova's new military strategy, in which Russia is named as the main threat. And when you say, "We will cut Ukraine off from the entire coastline and march victoriously to Transnistria, and that's the end for Moldova," how is Moldova supposed to respond when insane amounts of resources are poured in to influence elections in Moldova, to bring in pro-Russian forces, whatever you want? Bribery, special schemes. They even brought in priests in their robes, these battle mages. They were campaigning there for pro-Russian forces. Isn't that a threat? In other words, they just wanted to overthrow the government in Moldova and drag it back into their swamp. By the way, Peskov said that one country has already made such a mistake. It already has. So why don't you name that country? And there's another country, which Peskov doesn't name, that showed the whole world the true greatness, in quotes, of course, of Russia. And while the paper tiger doesn't know how to get out of this war, the real tiger in the East, I'm talking about China, is patiently waiting for the moment to make historical territorial claims. Although, I think they'll just hand over all of Siberia and the Far East right away, just like that. And first of all, I want to congratulate Moldova on its civilizational choice of the European path. And that's despite Russia's massive attempts to exert influence. I also wish them to finally resolve the issue in the near future with unrecognized Transnistria, because a pro-Russian enclave will bring you nothing good in the future. If you don't resolve this problem now, Russia will start dealing with it after the war in Ukraine. And by the way, if you missed yesterday's episode, it turns out that Peskov's son, who claimed he fought with the Wagner PMC and received a medal, was actually in the Maldives at the time he was supposed to be fighting. So he probably got the medal for conquering tequila, most likely. Friends, take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones, and let's help our soldiers from the 54th Separate Mechanized Brigade. For Dima and his brothers in arms. Together we are a great force. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.